Canadians have named inflation as their top concern. That's according to new polling from Nanos Research. Take a look at this. Asked to choose between inflation, climate change, the pandemic, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, 36% of respondents named inflation as their greatest worry. Climate change was named as the next pressing issue, according to 30% of respondents. It just edged out the pandemic by 1%. 3% of respondents named reconciliation with Indigenous peoples as their top priority. Nick, always nice to see you. Welcome to Power Play. So 36% of respondents to this poll named inflation as their top concern. What are they seeing that is making this their top, problem, concern, fear?
Well, what they're seeing is basically movement on the cost of everything, the cost to rent, cost to borrow with interest rates going up, also focused on the price of gas and essential goods. And, the interesting thing, Joyce, about this particular survey is that not only are Canadians worried about inflation, they're also worried about climate change. They're also worried about the pandemic. It's kind of like nothing's going right now for Canadians. And, roll up those three things. They see, for example, on climate change, what is happening in British Columbia, fires during the summertime, and now floods that are kind of ravishing the province. And then at the same time, they see the pandemic. They talk and focused on the Omicron variant. The thing is, this poll was just done in the last 48 hours. So this is fresh out. And the thing is that I think for a lot of Canadians, they're just looking at their lives and thinking, I'm worried about the pandemic coming back. I see climate change as a problem. And then the price of things are going up. So big surprise. There's just people are worried about a lot of things, not just one or two. It's kind of like a trifecta of pain and anxiety for average Canadians right now.
Yeah, a stressful time. And you feel that in question period in the House of Commons. So with the pandemic as a backdrop, obviously, this constant thing that, we're reminded of again because of the Omicron variant. But inflation has dominated the early days of the House of Commons. Conservatives have coined the term just inflation. So how do you see this impacting the minority Liberal government, as the session begins?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that people are going to want to hear not just from the Liberal government, but from the opposition parties what they're going to do about inflation. I think it's fair for the opposition parties to criticize the government of the day. That's their job, Joyce. That's their job. However, it's not enough. Aaron O'Toole and Jagmeet Singh, as leaders of the opposition, they need to propose what they would do as an alternative, because I think right now Canadians are very grumpy. They're very pessimistic. And they want to, maybe perhaps hear less bickering and more solutions about what the path forward is. So obviously there's going to be a significant amount of pressure on this Liberal government, the minority Liberal government right now, to try to navigate through this. But I would say, Joyce, that there's also going to be pressure on the opposition leaders, not just to criticize, but to put something forward in terms of what they think is a better solution or approach to managing and controlling inflation.
Yeah, but it is interesting, Nick, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So what do you make of, of it only being, flagged as, only 29% flag it as their main worry, below cost of living and inflation and economic issues?
I know, but at 29%, Joyce, let's remember the last federal election. The Liberals won with just a little over 30%. So, the fact that 3 out of every 10 Canadians are worried about the pandemic still should be taken seriously. I think what the poll shows is that there's not just one problem in Canada right now. There are multiple problems, and Canadians want solutions on all of those. Canadians are worried about inflation. They're worried about about climate change, and they're worried about the pandemic. And I think they're going to want to see solutions on all of these things, not just from the Liberals, but from the opposition parties too. And I think it's going to be a difficult parliament. And I think because Canadians are so worried about these issues.
I want to finish with a question about the poll on your podcast yesterday about the standard of living.
Yeah.
What are Canadians telling you about the standard of living? Because that shows a sort of deep pessimism out there.
Absolutely, Joyce. You know, the thing is, when I looked at these polling numbers, there's only one word to sum them up: brutal. Absolutely brutal. When we ask Canadians about whether they think that the next generation will have a higher, lower, the same standard of living, a whopping 63% believe that the next generation will have a lower standard of living, while only 11% think that it'll be a higher standard of living. The kicker or the killer on this study, we've been asking this question since 2012. Today, this week is the most pessimistic Canadians have ever been about the future and the standard of living for their kids and grandkids ever since we ever started tracking this back in 2012. And it speaks to what I'll say, this whole idea of people worried about inflation, people worried about the pandemic, and people worried about climate change.
Brutal, you said it, Nik Nanos. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us as usual. It's been a pleasure.
Take it easy.